I want you to visualize something. Picture a Tomahawk cruise missile. It is 18 feet long. It flies at 550 miles per hour. It can strike a target 1,000 miles away with surgical precision. It is the tip of the spear for the United States military. When you look at that missile, you see steel, you see explosives, you see jet fuel, but you are missing the most important component. Inside the guidance system, inside the wiring, inside the specialized batteries, there is roughly 15 kilograms of pure silver. That is roughly 500 ounces. At current prices, that silver is worth $30,000 or $40,000. Compared to the $2 million cost of the missile, it seems like a rounding error. But here is the catch. Without that 500 ounces of silver, the missile does not fly. Without the silver, the guidance system goes blind. Without the silver, the battery fails to start the engine. Silver is not just money, it is not just jewelry, it is a strategic weapon. For the last 80 years, the United States has fought wars based on the assumption that we have infinite materials. We assumed we could always build more ships, we could always build more planes, we could always build more missiles. But today, we are waking up to a terrifying reality. The United States government has sold its entire strategic stockpile of silver. We have 0 ounces left in the national defense stockpile. And we are currently engaged in a global arms race with nations that have been hoarding silver for decades. In this 4-part investigation, we are going to expose the Pentagon Silver Crisis. We are going to show you official government documents that prove the stockpile is empty. We are going to explain why modern warfare, from satellites to torpedoes, is impossible without massive amounts of silver. And we are going to look at what happens when the Department of Defense realizes they can't buy metal on the open market. They won't bid for it. They will seize it. This is the story of national security versus your portfolio. To understand the crisis, you have to understand the physics. Why does the military love silver? Why don't they use copper or aluminum? Because silver is the best conductor of electricity and heat in the known universe. In a consumer toaster, copper is fine. If the toaster gets a little hot, or if the signal's a little fuzzy, nobody dies. But in a fighter jet flying at Mach 2, or in a satellite orbiting in the vacuum of space, failure is not an option. You need the path of least resistance for the electron. You need a metal that doesn't spark, a metal that doesn't corrode, a metal that creates the most reliable contact possible. That metal is silver. Let's look at the inventory of a modern army. Silver zinc batteries. These are used in torpedoes and drones. They have a massive power-to-weight ratio. They are safer than lithium-ion. But they require huge amounts of silver plates. Bearings. The ball bearings in a jet engine are often electroplated with silver. Why? Because silver is the best solid lubricant. If the oil system fails, the silver coating prevents the engine from seizing up mid-flight. Satellites. Every solar panel on a military satellite uses silver. Every connector uses silver. Radios. The entire communication grid relies on silver-coated RF connectors. The Defense Logistics Agency classifies silver as a strategic material for a reason. You cannot run a 21st century military on 19th century metals. The more advanced our weapons become, the more silver they consume. A World War II tank used very little silver. A modern Abrams tank is a computer on tracks. It is full of silver. We have digitized warfare, and by digitizing it, we have tethered our national security to the supply of a precious metal. So, if silver is so critical, surely the United States keeps a massive stockpile? Surely, somewhere under a mountain in Colorado, there are billions of ounces waiting for a war? Once upon a time, yes. In the 1940s and 50s, the United States held the largest stockpile of silver in human history. We held over 3 billion ounces. It was a strategic asset. We used it for coinage, but we also kept it for the Manhattan Project. But then we got arrogant. In the 1960s, we removed silver from our coins. The government looked at the 3 billion ounces and said, we don't need this anymore. Money is digital, war is nuclear, silver is a relic. So they started selling. For 30 years, the US government dumped silver onto the market. They held auctions. They used it to mint commemorative coins. They effectively subsidized the low price of silver by flooding the world with America's inheritance. By the early 2002, the Defense Logistics Agency reported that the national defense stockpile of silver was effectively zero. They sold the last bars. They closed the vault. Today, the United States government owns virtually no silver. When the U.S. Mint needs to make silver eagles, they have to go into the open market and buy blanks from private refiners. When Raytheon needs silver for a missile, they have to buy it from a commercial bank. We went from being the Saudi Arabia of silver to being a beggar on the street. We have zero buffer. If a war starts tomorrow and the supply lines from Mexico and Peru are cut, the factory lines at Lockheed Martin stop. This brings us to the logistics model. For the last 30 years, the Pentagon adopted the corporate strategy of just-in-time delivery. They assumed that the global market would always function. They assumed that if they needed silver, they could just issue a purchase order and it would arrive in 2 days. This works in peacetime. It works when trade routes are open and prices are stable, but it fails catastrophically in a resource war. We are now seeing the cracks in the system. As we discussed in our Samsung video, the commercial sector is sucking up all the available silver. The float is gone. So now, when a defense contractor tries to buy silver, they are competing with Apple, Samsung, and Tesla. But the defense contractor moves slow. They have government bureaucracy. They have fixed price contracts. If the price of silver doubles, the contractor loses money on the missile. So they delay buying. They wait for the price to drop, but the price isn't dropping. So the inventory dries up. We are hearing reports of lead times for military-grade silver components, stretching from weeks to months. We are seeing delays in the delivery of key weapon systems. Why? Supply chain issues. Translation: we can't get the metal. We have built a military machine that assumes infinite supply, but we are operating in a world of finite scarcity. The just-in-time military is about to become the too-late military. Now, look at our adversaries. Look at China. While the United States was selling its 3 billion ounces, what was China doing? They were buying. China has been aggressively accumulating gold and silver for the last 20 years. They have encouraged their citizens to own it. They have built massive state refineries. They have banned the export of raw silver ore. China understands that silver is a strategic metal. They know that in a conflict, the first thing that happens is a blockade. If you control the physical metal inside your borders, you can keep building missiles and satellites. If you rely on the open market and the market closes, you are defenseless. This creates a terrifying asymmetry. China has a war chest of physical silver. The United States has a paper promise from J.P. Morgan. If the COMEX defaults, if the paper market breaks, China still has the metal to build weapons. The United States has a lawsuit against a bankrupt bank. This is a national security emergency that is not being discussed in Congress. They are talking about budgets. They are talking about software. They are not talking about the atoms required to execute the strategy. So the stockpile is gone. The demand is rising. The enemy is hoarding. What does the U.S. government do? They panic. In part 2, we are going to look at the government's response. We are going to analyze Executive Order 14017, America's supply chains. This is the document where the White House finally admitted that our dependence on foreign metals is a threat to national security. I'm going to show you the legal framework they have built to seize critical materials in an emergency. I am going to explain the Defense Production Act and how it allows the president to force companies to sell silver to the military before they sell it to you. And we are going to look at the potential for a strategic silver reserve to be rebuilt, which would require buying hundreds of millions of ounces from a market that has none to spare. The Pentagon is waking up, and when an elephant wakes up in a small room, everyone else gets crushed. Stay tuned for part 2. We are reading the executive orders. If you listened to part 1, you now understand the precarious position of the United States military. We have built the most advanced war machine in history. We have filled it with silver zinc batteries, silver-coated bearings, and silver-lined guidance chips. And then, we sold the entire national stockpile of silver to pay for budget deficits in the 1990s. We are flying without a parachute. But here's the thing about the Pentagon. They are slow, but they are not blind. They have supply chain analysts. They have war gamers. And in the last few years, the red lights on their dashboards have started flashing. They realized that if a conflict broke out in the Pacific, or if a pandemic shut down the mines in Peru, the assembly lines for the F-35 fighter jet would stop within weeks. In part 2, we are going to look at the government's response. We are going to analyze Executive Order 14017. This is the document where the White House officially panicked about critical minerals. I'm going to explain the Defense Production Act, the law that allows the president to seize your silver supply before it ever reaches your door. And we are going to explain why the civilian market is about to become a second-class citizen in the global silver trade. The government is done selling. They are getting ready to take. Let's look at the law. In February of 2021, the president signed a document that changed everything. Executive Order 14017, titled America's Supply Chains. Most people ignored it. It sounds boring. But if you read the text, it is a confession. It is the United States government admitting we have lost control of the materials we need to survive. The order mandated a 100-day review of critical supply chains, semiconductors, batteries, critical minerals. When the reports came back, the conclusion was terrifying. The Department of Defense reported that for many strategic materials, the United States is 100% dependent on foreign sources, often adversarial sources. While the public report focuses heavily on lithium and cobalt, the internal logic applies directly to silver. Silver is the cross-cutting material. You can fix the lithium supply for batteries, But if you don't have the silver for the contacts, the battery doesn't work. You can fix the silicon supply for chips, but if you don't have the silver for the bonding wires, the chip is a rock. This executive order was the starting gun for a new era of industrial policy. The government is no longer leaving supply to the free market. They are identifying strategic gaps. And silver is a massive, gaping hole in the strategy. Since that order was signed, we have seen the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense start to hoard data. They are mapping every mine. They are mapping every smelter. They are preparing the list. And you do not want to be on the wrong side of that list. So what happens when the shortage hits? Does the military go onto eBay and bid for silver coins? No. They use the Defense Production Act of 1950. This is a law passed during the Korean War. It gives the president sweeping powers to control the industrial base of the United States. It has been used recently for baby formula and ventilator production, but its original purpose was war. Specifically, Title III of the DPA allows the government to prioritize and allocate materials for national defense, incentivize the expansion of productive capacity and supply. Here is what that looks in practice. Let's say Raytheon needs 10,000 ounces of silver shot to build a batch of Tomahawk missiles, but the market is tight. There's no silver available at the refinery. The president invokes the DPA. The government sends a letter to the refinery. The letter says, you are hereby ordered to fulfill Raytheon's order before you fulfill any other commercial orders. It doesn't matter if Apple was next in line. It doesn't matter if the U.S. Mint was next in line to make Silver Eagles for you. The military cuts the line. Apple waits. You wait. The military eats first. This creates a crowding out effect. In a shortage, the available supply is not distributed by price. It is distributed by priority rating. The military has the highest rating. The civilian economy has the lowest. This means that during a crisis, the shelves at the bullion dealer will go empty, not because there is no silver, but because the silver has been allocated to strategic industries by federal law. You cannot buy what the government has already claimed. Let's get specific. The Department of Commerce manages a system called DPAS, Defense Priorities and Allocation System. Contracts are given a rating, DU or DX. DU means high priority. DX means highest national priority. DX orders must be filled before DU orders. And DU orders must be filled before unrated orders. If the conflict in the Pacific heats up, or if the drone warfare in Europe escalates, the Pentagon will start slapping DX ratings on silver procurement contracts. DX rating applied to silver procurement for the Patriot missile system. This creates a legal obligation for the supplier. If a refiner ignores a DX order to sell to a private customer, they face criminal penalties. They go to jail. So, who are they going to sell to? They are going to sell to the Pentagon. This is the mechanism of soft confiscation. They don't have to come to your house and take your silver coins. That is too messy. It is politically unpopular. Instead, they just seize the flow at the top of the stream. They seize the output of the refinery. They seize the output of the mine. If they turn off the tap at the source, the retail market dries up. Premiums on existing coins go to 100%. The street price decouples from the official price. But you can't get new metal, because every new ounce has a DX stamp on it. Now, here's the bullish case for the investor. The U.S. government knows it made a mistake selling the stockpile. There are quiet discussions in Washington about restocking. They know they need a buffer. They might not need 3 billion ounces again, but maybe they need 500 million ounces, a strategic energy and defense reserve. Imagine if the U.S. government enters the market as a buyer. They need to buy 500 million ounces. Global annual production is only 830 million ounces. They would be trying to buy 60% of the world's annual supply. If they announce this program, silver goes to $100 overnight, so they won't announce it. They will do it quietly. They will use dark money. They will use the Exchange Stabilization Fund. They will buy through proxies in London and Switzerland. This puts a massive invisible floor under the price. Every time silver drops, a mystery buyer steps in. We talked about the whale in our previous video series. What if the whale isn't Microsoft? What if the whale is the Department of Defense trying to fix a 30-year mistake? This is the ultimate put option for silver. The entity with the printing press needs the physical metal. They can print infinite dollars to buy finite silver. As an investor, you want to front-run that trade. You want to own the asset that the government must buy to keep its military functioning. So, the government has the legal power to seize supply. They have the motivation to hoard. But there's a problem. The silver isn't in the United States. We mine very little silver domestically. Most of it comes from Mexico, Peru, and China. The DPA only works on companies under U.S. jurisdiction. You can't order a mine in China to send you silver. In part 3, we are going to look at the geopolitics of extraction. We are going to look at how the U.S. is trying to create a mineral NATO. We are going to analyze the pressure Washington is putting on Canada and Mexico to secure the North American supply chain. And we are going to look at the risk of resource nationalization from the perspective of the Pentagon. If Mexico decides to keep its silver, the U.S. military has a problem. Does the U.S. invade for silver? Do we stage a coup for copper? History suggests the answer might be yes. The crisis isn't just about buying metal, it is about controlling the dirt it comes from. Stay tuned for part 3. We are looking at the map of the Silver War. If you have been following this briefing, you know the situation is critical. In part 1, we exposed the fact that the United States military has 0 strategic silver left. In part 2, we looked at the Defense Production Act, the law that allows the president to seize silver from domestic refineries. But there's a fatal flaw in that plan. A flaw so obvious that it keeps generals awake at night. The Defense Production Act stops at the border. The President of the United States can order a factory in Ohio to do whatever he wants, but he cannot order a mine in Mexico to dig faster. He cannot order a smelter in Peru to ship metal to New York instead of Shanghai. And he certainly cannot order a Chinese-owned mine in Africa to supply the U.S. Navy. Here is the hard truth. The United States consumes vastly more silver than it produces. We are dependent on imports for nearly 80% of our silver supply. We are a client state when it comes to the metal that powers our missiles. In part 3, we are going to look at the geopolitics of extraction. We are going to explore the desperate attempt by Washington to create a mineral NATO, an alliance of friendly nations to secure supply. We are going to look at the Mexican standoff, where the world's largest silver producer is threatening to nationalize its resources. And we are going to ask the uncomfortable question: if push comes to shove, will the United States launch a coup to secure the silver? History says yes. The war for silver isn't just about markets, it is about maps. Let's look at the numbers. According to the United States Geological Survey, the U.S. mines roughly 1,000 metric tons of silver a year, but we consume nearly 5,000 metric tons. The math doesn't work. We have a deficit of 4,000 tons every single year. Where does it come from? It comes from Mexico, it comes from Canada, it comes from Poland, it comes from Peru. For the last 30 years, we assumed this flow was guaranteed. We assumed that free trade meant secure trade. We signed NAFTA. We signed trade deals. We thought money solved everything. But in a resource-constrained world, money loses its power. If Mexico runs out of silver, or if Mexico decides to keep its silver, the United States cannot print silver. We cannot invent it. We have to import it. This makes the U.S. military strategically vulnerable to a supply blockade. If a hostile power, say China, were to buy up the supply at the source in South America, or if a pandemic shut down the ports, the U.S. defense industrial base would starve within months. We are addicted to foreign silver, and the dealer is starting to raise the price. Washington knows this. That is why, in 2022, the State Department launched the Mineral Security Partnership. Think of it as a NATO for metals. It includes the US, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and European nations. The goal is simple: friend-shoring. They want to build a supply chain that never touches China or Russia. They want to dig the silver in Mexico, refine it in Canada, and turn it into batteries in America. It sounds like a great plan. But there is a problem. The MSP is a club of consumers. Almost all the members are countries that need metal. They are not the countries that have the metal. The countries that have the metal, Mexico, Peru, Chile, Bolivia, are not fully on board. They are looking at this mineral NATO and asking, why should we sell to you at a discount? Why should we let you take our wealth to build your green economy? This creates tension. The U.S. is trying to create a walled garden, but the walls are crumbling because the global South is demanding a better deal. This brings us to the most critical country in the Silver War, Mexico. Mexico is the Saudi Arabia of silver. It has been the world's top producer for centuries. Nearly 25% of global silver comes from Mexican soil. Most of that silver flows north to the United States, but the political winds in Mexico are shifting. Recent administrations have pushed a policy of resource nationalism. They nationalized the lithium industry. They stopped issuing new open-pit mining permits. They are demanding higher taxes and royalties from foreign mining companies. Imagine this scenario. The price of silver hits $80 an ounce. The Mexican government looks at the Canadian and American companies operating in their country. They see them making billions in profit. They say, enough. We are implementing an export ban. All silver mined in Mexico must be refined in Mexico and used for Mexican industry first. Or they implement a 90% windfall tax. This would devastatingly impact the U.S. supply chain. If the flow from Mexico stops, the U.S. has nowhere else to go. Canada produces some silver, but not enough. Poland is too far and too close to the Russian conflict zone. Mexico has leverage, and they know it. In a world where the U.S. needs silver for EVs and missiles, Mexico holds the keys to the castle. We are entering a Mexican standoff. The U.S. needs the metal. Mexico wants the power. Who blinks first? While the U.S. tries to build friend-shoring alliances, China has been playing a different game, the Belt and Road Initiative. For 20 years, Chinese state-owned enterprises have been buying mines in Peru, Bolivia, and Africa. They build the roads, they build the ports, they build the power plants. In exchange, they get the offtake agreements. They get the legal right to the first shipment of ore. So even if a mine is in Peru, if the mine is owned by a Chinese company, and the ore is contracted to go to a Chinese smelter, the US cannot touch it. We are seeing a geopolitical encirclement. China controls the processing, and now they own the source. They have effectively captured the supply chain inside the Western Hemisphere. Las Bambas in Peru, major copper and silver assets in the Andes. They are Chinese assets on Latin American soil. This is a direct challenge to the Monroe Doctrine. Since 1823, the US has said, the Western Hemisphere is our backyard. No foreign powers allowed. But China is already there. They are in the mines. If the US military needs silver and the mine next door is owned by Beijing, that is a strategic failure of the highest order. So what does a superpower do when it is cornered? When it needs a resource for national survival and the owner won't sell? It stops asking. It starts taking. We have to look at history. In 1953, the U.S. staged a coup in Iran because of oil. In 1973, the U.S. supported a coup in Chile because of copper. In the 21st century, will we see regime change operations because of silver? If a government in Latin America decides to nationalize the mines and cut off the U.S. supply, the CIA and the Pentagon will not sit idly by. They will view it as an act of aggression. They will label it a national security threat. We might see sanctions. We might see freedom operations. We might see the U.S. military securing the mines directly. This sounds extreme. But remember the Tomahawk missile. Without silver, the missile doesn't fly. Without the missile, the empire doesn't function. Therefore, access to silver is an existential requirement for the empire. This adds a war premium to the price of silver. We are not just trading supply and demand. We are trading war and peace. If conflict breaks out over resources in South America, the supply lines get cut instantly. Insurance rates for shipping go vertical, and the price of physical silver in North America detaches from the rest of the world. So the geopolitics are messy, the allies are unreliable, the enemy is entrenched. The only solution for the United States is to rebuild what it threw away, the strategic stockpile. The Pentagon cannot rely on Mexico. It cannot rely on just in time. It needs a mountain of silver sitting in a vault in Nevada under armed guard. It needs to buy 500 million ounces, and it needs to do it now before the war starts. In part 4, the final chapter, we are going to look at the restocking event. I am going to show you why the Department of Defense will likely become the biggest buyer of silver in the world over the next 5 years. We are going to analyze the dark money flows that might already be accumulating metal. And I am going to explain what this means for you. If the US government enters the market as a price inelastic buyer, if they are willing to print infinite dollars to secure finite silver, what is the ceiling price? Hint, there isn't one. The military is coming for the metal. You want to be holding it before they issue the purchase order. Stay tuned for part 4, the conclusion of the crisis. We have reached the final chapter of this investigation. We have traced the silver crisis from the guidance chip of a Tomahawk missile through the empty vaults of the Defense Logistics Agency to the hostile minds of the geopolitical South. The picture we have painted is stark. The United States military, the most powerful force on Earth, is structurally short the one metal it needs to function. We sold our inheritance, we outsourced our refining, we alienated our suppliers. And now, as the drums of war beat louder in Europe and Asia, the Pentagon is staring at an empty cupboard. But there is one final piece of this puzzle, the solution. The United States government will not simply accept defeat. They will not stop building missiles because they ran out of silver. They will do what empires always do when they are cornered. They will print money, and they will buy the resource. In part 4, we are going to explore the restocking event. I'm going to show you why the Department of Defense is likely to become the single largest buyer of silver in the world over the next decade. We are going to look at the dark money mechanisms they use to accumulate metal without spiking the price on the public markets. And finally, I'm going to explain the infinite bid, why the government's ability to print unlimited dollars creates a price floor for silver that no bank manipulation can ever break. The military is coming for the metal, and you are standing in their way. This is the final verdict. Let's do the math on what it would take to fix this problem. In the 1950s, we had 3 billion ounces. We don't need that much today. But military analysts suggest we need at least a 3-year buffer. This ensures that if a war breaks out and global trade stops, we can keep the factories running for 36 months. The U.S. defense industry consumes roughly 20 to 30 million ounces of silver a year directly. A 3-year buffer would be roughly 100 million ounces. But if you include the energy transition as part of national security, that number jumps to 500 million ounces. So the target is 500 million ounces. Where does the government get it? Global mine production is 830 million ounces. If the U.S. government tried to buy 500 million ounces on the open market, they would have to buy 60% of everything mined on Earth for a year. Or they would have to buy 100% of the silver in the COMEX registered vaults 10 times over. There is simply not enough metal available, so they cannot buy it all at once. They have to buy it slowly, systematically, relentlessly. This creates a permanent bid. Imagine a buyer who stands in the market every single day, buying 1 million ounces, regardless of the price. $30? Buy. $50? Buy. $100? Buy. This buyer doesn't care about technical analysis. They don't care about the RSI. They care about filling the vault. This is the restocking event. It effectively removes a huge chunk of supply from the market every year, tightening the noose on everyone else. But surely, you say, if the government was buying, we would see it. It would be in the budget. Not necessarily. The United States Treasury operates a secretive account called the Exchange Stabilization Fund. It was created in 1934. It has massive discretionary power. It can trade gold, foreign currencies, and other instruments to defend the dollar. It operates outside the congressional budget process. It doesn't have to report its daily trades. If the National Security Council decides that silver is a strategic risk, they can use the ESF to acquire the metal covertly. They wouldn't buy silver futures on the COMEX. That is too public. They would use proxies. They would use bullion banks like JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs to buy physical metal in London or Switzerland on their behalf. The metal would move into a private vault. The ledger would show private investor, but the owner would be Uncle Sam. This explains the mystery of the whales we often see in the market. Massive buyers who absorb dip after dip, never selling. Why would a hedge fund never sell? Because it isn't a hedge fund. It is a strategic reserve. Strategic reserves don't trade, they hoard. We may already be in the early stages of this accumulation. The drain on the LBMA vaults, the drain on the COMEX. It isn't just retail investors stacking coins. It is likely the slow, quiet return of the sovereign buyer. This brings us to the economic concept of the infinite bid. As an investor, you have a budget. If silver goes to $500, maybe you can't afford to buy more. Industry has a budget. If silver gets too expensive, maybe Apple tries to use less. But the government? The government has a printing press. The government has the Federal Reserve. Their supply of dollars is literally infinite. Now, compare that to silver. Silver is finite. It is created by exploding stars. We have to dig it out of the ground. When an entity with infinite money chases an asset with finite supply, the price has no ceiling. If a Raytheon tells the Pentagon silver is $200 an ounce, the missile costs more. Does the Pentagon say, okay, stop making missiles? No, they pay the extra cost. Congress passes a supplemental spending bill. The Fed prints the cash. The check clears. This makes the military a price inelastic buyer. They are insensitive to price. They will pay any number to secure the metal. This puts a floor under the market that is made of concrete. Even if the economy crashes, even if the stock market collapses, the military will keep buying silver because war is recession-proof. Actually, war is recession-causal. And in a war economy, silver is more valuable than gold. Gold sits in a vault. Silver wins the war. So the government buys, the price rises. What happens to you? What happens to the civilian market? We get crowded out. As the military secures the supply, there is less left over for the private sector. The U.S. Mint is the canary in the coal mine. By law, the U.S. Mint is supposed to produce silver eagles to meet public demand. But in recent years, they have frequently announced allocations or halted sales. Why? We cannot source enough silver blanks. If the Defense Department invokes the Defense Production Act, the refiners will send their silver to Raytheon, not the U.S. Mint. The production of silver eagles will stop. The production of private bars will stop. You will go to a dealer website, and it will say sold out. Not because the price is too low, but because the metal has been nationalized at the refinery level. This leads to a massive decoupling. The official price might be $70, but you cannot buy it. If you want to buy silver, you have to buy it from another person on the secondary market. And that person knows you can't get it anywhere else, so they charge you $150. This is the civilian lockout. The window to exchange your paper dollars for strategic metal is open right now. But when the restocking event accelerates, that window slams shut, the government will not share with you. Let's summarize the findings of this investigation. Fact 1. The U.S. military is critically dependent on silver for everything from missiles to satellites. Fact 2. The U.S. government sold its entire strategic stockpile, leaving us with zero buffer. Fact 3. Our adversaries control the refining capacity and are hoarding the metal. Fact 4. Our suppliers are becoming hostile and resource nationalist. Fact 5. The only solution is for the U.S. government to print money and buy massive amounts of silver. What is the conclusion for the investor? Silver is not just a trade. It is a geopolitical necessity. You're holding the asset that the empire needs to survive. The empire has been negligent. They forgot to stack. Now they are waking up in a panic. They are going to come into the market with trillions of dollars of buying power. You have a head start. You own the metal before the executive order is signed. You own the metal before the Defense Production Act is triggered. This puts you in the most powerful position possible. You are front-running the Pentagon. You are front-running the Green New Deal. You are front-running the inevitable remilitarization of the global economy. Do not be shaken out by daily price volatility. Do not worry if silver drops 50 cents tomorrow. Look at the missile. Look at the empty vault. Look at the map. The physics of war demand higher silver prices. And physics always wins. The U.S. military ran out of silver. Make sure you don't. Subscribe.